And it's
Welcome.
live.
Good
Hey.
morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the Groovy Podcast. My name is Ken Cousin, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut. And
And Baruch Sadogurski from Sunnyvale, California.
you actually said your last name.
Yeah, no, you keep reminding me that I should do it, so I did
Well, clearly, it does seem that you do remember it. I worry there occasionally.
it. Yeah.
How are things in the new J Frog office?
It's absolutely awesome. We love it. We had our first meetup in the new office a couple of days ago on Tuesday. It was great. Good turnaround in the facilities. It worked great. So now I hope we'll have at least one meetup a month. And Ken, when you are in the area, let's do some groovy meetup.
Oh, absolutely. Sounds like a plan. I don't know when I'm going to be out there again, but I'm sure we can keep it in mind. What sorts of meetups are you having there?
So we usually do the stuff that we care about, like DevOps and this kind of stuff. But we also care about Groovy, so I think that will be just wonderful.
Oh, well, it's good to hear. Any rate, this is November 17th, so I've got the show notes posted. Anything else you want to comment on before we dive into the news items themselves?
Let's dive into the news items because they are great.
Okay, well, we had a release, actually two releases of Grails this week. The 3.2.3 release came out, and also in the 3.1 line, they released 3.1.14. The 3.1 is more maintenance related. 3.2 is, of course, the primary branch now. 3.2.3 included mostly bug fixes and some small improvements, but some people did comment on the return of the Grails wrapper, Grails W. You ever used that before?
No, but it looks like the whole wrapper thing is, picking up, and I'm glad to see that. I think that the idea is clear and the advantages are obvious. So it's actually very good to see.
Well, for a while, I wondered why, because you just install Grails. It's not even like you've got a full installer. You just have a zip file you unzip and set the home variable. But the same benefit from the Grails wrapper is the one you get from the Gradle wrapper, which means you already have a wrapper that specifies the correct version of Grails for this particular app. And since Grails
Exactly.
does depend on, each app does depend on which version of Grails it was created under, that is a real benefit there.
Yep.
Yeah, I often use good old SDK man to switch between Grails versions when I'm working on different apps. But this
Well, so I
way,
guess that's the dependency that you don't need anymore with the wrapper, and that's the good thing about it, because you can argue that you don't need the Gradle wrapper when you use SDK man. But again, the whole idea of those wrappers is about minimizing system dependencies, and that's another step forward.
well, it's also one thing for a developer to install multiple versions of Grails. It's a whole other thing for the client or for the deployment environment. And this way, by having the wrapper in there, you could key everything to the wrapper and you get everything already set up properly. That's very helpful.
Yes, it is.
Seems pretty much coincidental that Gradle is also on 3.2, strangely
Yeah.
enough. They don't have a dot version. I think they're 3.2.0 at the moment. So they released that. Again, the vast majority of the changes are performance related. They have claimed that they have improved the analysis of what dependencies are needed in many cases, especially in very large, complex builds, so that the startup time is vastly improved. So from a developer point of view, it doesn't really seem to change much, but from a user point of view, it's nice to know that things are improving under the hood.
Yep. So that's they continue with all this notion of performance improvements on before anything else, before any new feature, and I guess that's what they hear from their huge customers that they have. That's the most important. That's the most important at the moment, more important than the other things.
I know they spend a lot of time with companies like Netflix, which have literally thousands of Gradle builds. and therefore need to worry about scale all the time. So yeah, that's probably
Exactly.
where that's coming from. They did mention that the Kotlin support is on its way, so they do continue to work on that. We'll see how that comes out.
Did we mention the blog post with the milestones last time? I don't remember. They have a blog post that specifies the milestones from now all the way to full support for Kotlin, and you can check where they stand and what the plans are.
Oh, I didn't. No, I did not see that last time. So there is a blog post listing the actual dates on the milestones.
I'm not sure they have dates, but at least they have scopes. Let me find it and I will add it to the show
Okay.
notes.
Well, while you're doing that, I should mention, of course, the
I would
one thing
expect you to do it because you are, for the
I did
obvious
roll that
reasons, Kotlin God.
softball in. I was waiting for you to hit it. I mean, after
Of
all, you
course,
know.
of course. No, I couldn't resist.
Well, I would have been disappointed had you not done so. At any rate, while you're doing that, there is one change that does affect developers in Gradle, and that is in 3.2, they have finally officially deprecated the left shift operator as a way of defining tasks. The reason basically being is that so many people get that wrong. You know, when you one of the keys to understanding Gradle builds is to understand the difference between configuration time and execution time. And when you are putting in the left shift operator, it's as though you're adding in a do last block inside, and therefore all the code inside the task is executed at execution time rather than configuration time. But without the left shift operator, then everything is configuration time. In fact, so everything in there will get run no matter whether you're running that task or not. And if you have that and a do last, it could get confusing. So at any rate, they have finally, after all this time, deprecated that and said, "Oh, they're tired of explaining to people the difference." I mean, they didn't say that, but clearly that was a lot of the motivation. Are you glad to see it go?
Yeah, the difference between the conceptual difference between configuration time and execution time, it wasn't that clear, and when you add to it a very subtle syntax difference between the two blocks of code, that makes it very hard to understand. So that makes perfect sense. And generally, I have to say that I would really love to see. Um, um, I would say easier way to write the code in the tasks which are externalized in plugins, and maybe a little bit harder to write the code inside the Groovy script itself. So one of the things that I Maven that for Maven have so large adoption, I would say, is that the build masters are 100% sure that the users won't mess with their build so much just because it's impossible. So with Groovy, we are in the with Gradle, we are in the opposite side of things, where it's very inviting to start hacking around the build script itself. And if it will be more inviting to externalize the code instead of writing it inside the build script, I think it's a good move.
Well, it's the old story of sometimes your greatest strength is also your biggest weakness. Gradle is extremely easy to customize, and of course, the Gradle build file basically supports anything in the Groovy language. And some of the downsides to that are, as you say, people have a tendency to put business logic or anything that's beyond simple configuration right in the build script, and that's a problem. As you get better at Gradle, then people do have a tendency to write their own custom tasks and then ultimately package those into plugins. But yes, it's a gray area, and it can be difficult. I don't know whether removing the left shift operator itself is a step along that path, but I did get some very positive reactions in my Twitter feed when I mentioned it. A lot of people were very happy to see that go, but a couple others, people like Andres Almire, who know this stuff so well, they just they breathe it. They like operator overloading. He probably was disappointed to see it gone. Or maybe you could add it as an option or something like that. At any rate, they have in fact deprecated it. I assume that with older build files that use it, it'll give some sort of warning. I tried out Gradle 3.2 with an existing build, but I haven't used that left shift operator in some time, so I haven't gone to see what the actual warning is that you get when you use the older syntax.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So, any rate, that was another major release. Now, the Spock framework is headed for a major release. They sent out 1.1 release candidate 3. I believe they claim that, by the way, Spock 1.1 official is on its way. And the major change there is something that's actually sweeping its way through the industry, is that they are replacing CG Live with this new Java project called ByteBuddy. I assume you're familiar with that.
Yeah, so I heard about the change, and generally, ByteBuddy is kind of the new and modern and more popular way to more sane way to manipulate bytecode than the very aging CGLib. So if you need today a framework for manipulating bytecode, definitely ByteBuddy is the way to go. Generally, I'm extremely happy to see Spock finally starting to move forward again, because it's already better than everything else the market has to offer. But it was in a kind of stagnating period for quite a while, where when Peter Netherweiser was busy with other things. So I'm really happy to see it moving forward again.
Yeah, I have seen ByteBuddy referred to both as the byte manipulation library used inside Mockito. It's also apparently being adopted by the Hibernate people as well. They have a tendency to be one of the first major Java projects to adopt a new technology, then tends to filter through. For example, as I recall, they were one of the first major non-Groovy related Java projects to adopt Gradle. And when they adopted Gradle those several years ago, they felt it was sufficiently big. It was a sufficiently big deal. They had to write a blog post justifying it, explaining why they did it. By the time the Spring framework got around to adopting Gradle as their build tool, it wasn't even really worth noting. But at any rate, if both Mockito and Hibernate are using ByteBuddy, it's nice to see that Spock is using it as well for the mock objects inside.
Yeah, and funny enough, of course, Hibernate being part of Red Hat, another project of Red Hat, namely Wildfly, just announced that they won't support Gradle builds anymore.
Are you serious?
Yes, they had some. I guess that's another news that I need to add to our show notes. They had a blog post explaining that it will still be, at the moment at least, run with Gradle, but they are not going to talk about how their build is uh, structured, because they want eventually to phase Gradle out, and that's because they look for features, Maven-like features in Gradle, and don't find them. So one of the complaints was we cannot extend from parent POM in Gradle. And the other was, well, the bill of materials POMs don't work as they work in Maven. And my only reaction was that is, well, it's another tool. The concept cannot be matched one to one. So if you think that the features that you had in Maven are better, don't just use Maven, right? And if you want to switch to Gradle, you need to switch the way you think about your build and what you do with your build, and how you work with it.
Well, personally, I think that says more about Maven than anything else, because my experience has often been that if you work on a project that was built with Maven from the beginning, it's very, very difficult to get out of that. It's very difficult not to use Maven on projects that have grown up under its framework. Now, of course, Gradle uses the build init plugin, which has been in what do they call it, incubating for literally years. But the build init plugin allows you to run Gradle on a project that has a Maven POM in it, and it will generate a Gradle build file for you of varying degrees of success. Just this last week, I was doing a Spring Boot application. I was working with Spring and Spring Boot, and I happened to take an example that had been generated with the Maven POM. I ran the Gradle build init plugin on it, and it made in order to see if I get a Gradle build file out of it, it made a couple of odd choices. It did a couple of things that were awkward, but in general, it was very easy to clean up and switch to Gradle inside it. But I do understand that people who are locked into Maven have a difficult time leaving it. Now, of course, the whole idea of a parent POM, I mean, in Gradle, you have imports, you have plugins, you have all kinds of things. But I understand that it's not the same way of thinking. I will also say, by the way, that I still, after all these years, find the name Wildfly to be ridiculous. I mean, I honestly, I mean, come on. They name their application server after a bug. I mean, and if you've seen the icon for it, it's not a bug you want to be around. It's a bug you want to swat. A wildfly is not something you adopt. A wildfly is something you go get some kind of bug spray for. I still can't believe that they approve that name. Now, I normally try not to go off on that rant, but if they're going to toss out Gradle, then clearly whoever's making the decisions over there is having some issues anyway. And this is just something I have not used or even been interested in anything involving JBoss application server after they switch the name to Wildfly. So be it, I suppose.
Yeah. Getting back to the init plugin, I glad to hear that it still works. It was code that I wrote really many years ago. I think like maybe 6 years ago or something, to convert some Maven projects that I had, and glad to hear that it's still useful.
I didn't realize you were one of the people on that. I don't think I knew you well enough back then to recognize the name. Well, how about that? You did something good. Again, my experience with it is that if your Maven POM is reasonably straightforward, if you don't have a bunch of funny plugins and you haven't done a bunch of customization, it produces something that as a first pass you can play with a little bit in a Gradle build file and get it to work without a problem. I don't know how well it works on more complex Gradle builds, and I also don't know what they've done to it since they've adopted it as part of Gradle proper, with the plugin. But it's still been sitting there in incubating mode for years and years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I did some really, converting the dependencies and incorporating the parent POM and taking the repositories from settings file. So just the basic stuff around it, and it should give you a start. It should give you a place to begin with, and then you gracefully should port whatever you have in your POM file back to Gradle.
Yeah, I always recommend it as saying it's a way to get started. I don't expect it to be perfection, but it is. Get started. Yeah. Now, as I mentioned, I did it with Spring Boot. Spring Boot used to recommend Groovy a lot more before the pivotal divorce. Now they don't really talk about it. They kind of talk about everything being in Java, even though the CLI support in Groovy is there. But I will say one interesting thing happened with Spring Boot regarding Gradle, in fact, is that Spring Boot has a Gradle plugin, of course, and when you make a new Spring Boot application with the Spring Initializer, then you can specify that you want to use a Gradle build as opposed to a Maven build, and that the Spring Boot plugin for Gradle has always used a build script notation inside the Gradle build the same way that many other plugins do. Well, they have finally, as of I think it was this week, have put the Gradle plugin for Spring Boot inside the Gradle plugin portal, the plugins.gradle.org. And what that means is you can use the simpler syntax. You could just use the plugin syntax with the colons and an ID and a version number, and you don't need the whole build script block and an apply statement. Now, it doesn't actually change the behavior in any way, but it does simplify the syntax if you are interested in that. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so I found it
enough on the same topic of Spring Boot and Gradle. Again, I don't remember if we already covered it. There was some kind of I would say tension between Andy Wilkinson, the creator of Spring Boot plugin, and Spring Dependency Manager plugin, and the Gradle team when they released Gradle 3 with some incompatibility between the APIs, which prevented Andy to write a single plugin that supports both Gradle 2 and Gradle 3, and he was very upset about it and declared that their plugins won't support Gradle 3 but only Gradle 2. And I have to say that now things got much more calm. Recently, another issue on this on their GitHub project was asking to bring back the dependency for Gradle 3, and Andy said that most of the things work out of the box with Gradle 2 plugin, and whatever doesn't work will probably work with 3.1, and generally they will officially support Gradle 3 back with the release of Spring Boot 1.5.
Oh, that's good to know. I knew there was some tension. I also know that when you actually, pardon me, when you actually generate the Gradle plugin from the, I'm sorry, I don't mean the Gradle plugin. When you generate a Gradle build file from the Spring Initializer, it does expect to be using Gradle 2.something, 2.x, but I didn't know that whether it supported 3 or not yet, but of course, by the time they hit Spring Boot 1.5, that shouldn't be long from now anyway. They're on a 1.4 I think it's 2 at this point. I'm not sure what their time frame is, but they're moving forward, especially because the biggest thing in that ecosystem is that they're anticipating the release of Spring 5 in the first quarter of next year. There should be a release candidate for Spring 5 at the end of this year, and then the full version next year. Now, of course, this also affects the Grails people because Grails is still basically built on top of Spring Boot these days, so that whatever affects the Spring Boot people ultimately affects the Grails people as well.
Yes. I'm adding those couple of things that I just shoot out of my head to the show notes, so we will have them there as well.
Oh, well, good idea. Okay, so that takes care of the Grails happenings and the Gradle happenings and Spock as well. I believe that Rat Pack released a 1.4.4 version, but it's just a couple of bug fixes over the 1.4.3, so nothing dramatic. Although I did see that, again, I'm jumping around in the show notes, but Mr. Hockey, the inimitable Mr. Hockey, has updated his Rat Packed notebook so that this is basically what Mr. Hockey does is he takes his huge volume of blog posts and he sorts them into the categories Groovy, Gradle, Grails, Rat Pack, and ASCII Doc. And he has published a series of notebooks that encapsulate, if you will, those individual posts under LeanPub so that you can purchase one of those, and every time he updates that with a new release, you can go and get the update whenever you like. So at any rate, the Rat Pack notebook was updated as well as his awesome ASCII Doctor notebook, in case you're interested. But I did want to mention that about Rat Pack. Also on Rat Pack, just as an aside, Guillaume LaForge has been pretty busy these days, you may have noticed, with his work at Google. Now, a lot of that work at Google has involved Google Cloud-related projects. He's transitioned somewhat into a bit of an evangelist for all that stuff. But he attended Devox this last week. Now, were you at Devox, by the way?
No, I was in 2 different conferences in the same week.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Cube in San Francisco and WJAX.
Okay, well, the Devox one that Guillaume was attending is the big one in Belgium, you know, and that Paul King was there. No, Paul King was in ApacheCon. Anyway, we'll come back to Paul. But at any rate, when Guillaume was at Devox, 2 interesting things happened. As long as you mention Red Hat, Guillaume LaForge actually met up with good old James Strachan again, the creator of Groovy. They posted a picture of the 2 of them together smiling, and how James has since posted many times on how much he really still likes Groovy and all that. And that was just nice to see. But of course, more interesting from a developer point of view is that Guillaume wrote a nice little application and a blog post he called Binge Streaming Web APIs with Rat Pack and a whole bunch of additional things as well. This was very interesting in that he basically took the JSON feed from the conference, you know, with the list of presenters and topics and presentations and everything. And he produced that in real time in such a way that people could use a RESTful interface to vote on how happy they were about various presentations going on. And he was able to give back the answers in real time. And he did this, let me make sure I get the collaborator's name right. He did this with, what's her name? Audrey, Neveu. What do you suppose, Niveau?
Yep.
I'm just guessing.
Yep.
At any rate, she did apparently the UI, the user interface on a lot of that, and he did a presentation on that. So he did Ratpack, Cloud Endpoints, App Engine, Flex, and StreamData.io, and we have a link in here to the blog post and his show notes, and he went into a considerable amount of detail. I noticed that his Ratpack part was very straightforward. I mean, without having to know much about Ratpack, you can follow very easily exactly what he did there. And then the rest of it spent time on the cloud portion and the additional improvements. There's a link in his blog both to the actual presentation and to the slides as well, which are posted on, of course, Google Slides, interestingly enough.
Yep. And just to add controversy, as I usually do, it looks like James is off his love with Scala completely. And he tweeted something along the most interesting languages for him now are Groovy and Kotlin. So I think we can close this chapter of if I knew Java, I wouldn't write Groovy, and put it to rest finally after all those years.
Oh, I think that's been done for a while now. That's true. And he does seem to have fallen out of love with Scala, just as he fell in love with it for a while. I'm just waiting for him to suddenly discover Kotlin, and then we'll see what happens there too.
Yeah, I think he already mentioned that
Yes.
the short list of his favorite languages now are Groovy and Kotlin.
Right. So at any rate, it was good to see a picture. It's good to know he's back in the conference circuit. The other thing, by the way, regarding Guillaume Laforge, he wrote another blog post in the last couple of weeks. He is now officially verified on Twitter, and he blogged about what he had to do in order to make that happen. When are you going to be officially verified on Twitter?
Well, I watched this conversation. It's Bernard Wolf, the highly profile German speaker and Java consultant, bragged that he got now verified, and Guillaume asked him what he has to do. And I saw the list, and I'm like, well, probably when I will have time, which means never. It's just too much of a hassle for I'm not sure what benefit it, except of the bragging rights, it actually brings.
Well, I noticed that you have approximately, 4,200 followers? That's why I'm looking at your profile now.
If you say so, okay.
Yeah, I probably have about half that. I've got a little over 2,000, I think. Of course, the one I've got to check, right, would have to be Dan Veloper, right? Because Dan Woods has, according to his profile, he's only got 2,500. I might be pretty close to that. That's something. So
yeah. So the interesting part with Dan that he got to this amount of followers in like 2 weeks, right?
yeah, but of course Guillaume had over 10,000, and that's as it should be. I shouldn't have anywhere near the number of followers of Guillaume Laforge. I wonder if getting verified depends on how many followers you have, and we both have so few. I shouldn't say we both. I certainly have so few. I don't know that they would even listen to me. You might.
I think it's a combination of how significant you are as a figure for the community and the number of followers that you have.
So in other words, it's not going to happen for either of us anytime soon.
Exactly. And I don't even bother to gather all those documents and proofs how important I am, just because I really don't see what benefit it has.
Well, but speaking of that, so it really was partly a segue. What was notable is apparently the Apache Groovy Twitter feed has now exceeded 2,000 followers.
Now, those are great news, and this is definitely a community significant Twitter account.
Right. So, I mean, it's good to know, because that also happened on the other Apache Groovy occasion that happened as well, anniversary, is that now Groovy has been a top-level project at Apache for over 1 year, believe it or not.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
was such
Time flies.
Yeah, that was amazing how quickly that happened, how quickly that came and went. I'd love to see the most recent data on downloads and everything, but it looks to be still a reasonably stable, slowly growing, but popular project. You don't hear about it that often, again, but it is one of those quieter technologies that people don't talk about as much, but it's still around. It's still very active in all the affiliated projects as well. And of course, if you want to learn more about Groovy, that leads me back to Paul King that I mentioned. Now, as I've mentioned to you and to others many times, Paul King is one of my personal heroes. I find I just simplify my life by just saying if Paul King says it, I just assume it's right. Everything he says is right. That's the easiest simplification for me.
He's a doctor.
Well, unfortunately, I know too many doctors that aren't always right. I mean, I'm one of them. So, I that doesn't quite carry the weight that it might in other cases, but nevertheless, for Paul, it does. But at any rate, he was making some presentations at ApacheCon in Seville, Spain, Sevilla, however you would pronounce it. And he did he updated his slides at SlideShare. Now, Paul, for many years, posted all of his slides on SlideShare. And I always found it a mixed blessing going to a Paul King talk, because he is the kind of guy who will try to stuff 150 slides into an hour,
Yes.
But his slides tend to have enough detail on them that if you can browse the slides at your leisure, then you get a lot out of it. I don't know if I told you this story, but back when I was writing Making Java Groovy, what happened to me over and over again is I would spend days or a week figuring out a particular topic, trying to understand it and everything. And then I would go and find a presentation by Paul King on SlideShare that had everything laid out in all detail, plus beyond what I'd even considered. And this happened to me at least great. 3 times before I learned enough to go look there first, before I did.
Yes.
But anyway, the reason I bring it up is that he actually posted updates to 2 of his presentations. One called Apache Groovy, The Awesome Parts, which I think he's going to do at G3 Summit as well. And another one called Working with Groovy and Databases, which includes some features that, all the years I've been working with the Groovy.SQL class, there were a couple new slides in there of things I had never used. Never seen. So I put the links in the show notes. Again, it's always a good idea to check out presentations by Paul, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him at the Gradle Summit. I did notice that he did change his title in these slides to what is it, Groovy? What was it exactly? Let me get it right, because I don't want to mess it up here. But it says something about Groovy at OCI, so I'm waiting for it to load here. Groovy Lead for Object Computing Incorporated. So Groovy Lead at OCI.
And this is one of the most exciting developments of the last month, because when Paul King is working full-time on Groovy, we can be sure that we are in very, very good hands.
Yes, good things will happen as a result.
Exactly.
But at any rate, so that, of course, gives me a segue to OCI. And OCI published a couple of things this week, or people working for OCI did. One was a Grails case study. I put the link in the show notes, but I did want to warn anybody who downloads it. It is a PDF, which is not necessarily a problem, but if you're accessing the show notes on a mobile browser, it's always nice to know that. And it was a case study showing why a particular client happened to prefer Grails for solving one of their problems. I'm trying to load it right now to see. It's RGA, case study talking about that. And therefore, if you're trying to look for the business case for clients to present why you might want to use Grails on a particular project, OCI has presented that. Right now, the link doesn't seem to be working, but it was up there last week. Also, Zach Klein, who I'm sure you know, put up a post about a new profile in Grails. He's updated or put in a React profile for Grails. So that'd be a nice companion to the AngularJS profile for Grails, and yet another way of building in a JavaScript-related front end on a Grails app.
Yes.
Right. So again,
Another interesting news item that again came not from the list, but I retrofit it to the list.
yeah.
Just adding it now is interestingly enough, our very own co-host Peter Ledbrook had a couple of blog posts in the Gradle corporate blog. I am not sure what it's supposed to mean, and I leave this question open.
Well, dropping that on a public podcast like this, I'm sure he'll just love that.
Well, the blog is public, I have to say.
Yes, but our speculation about it is not necessarily. But at any rate, yeah, we'll have to send him a message and have to send him a message and see what he thinks, what's going on. It's long since we should have checked in with him anyway. I keep thinking of doing that, and I keep getting I keep thinking of it when I'm not in front of my desk when I can't actually send the mail, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to send him a message and see, how things are going with him and if there's anything he wants to do. We're still awaiting his grand entrance, to come back and make an appearance on the podcast here. So that's good to hear that he's still active and that things are going on. And it sounds like there may be on the verge of things happening as well. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, so I just added that to the news to the show notes as well.
Oh, good. I suppose I should refresh then to see the show note. Whoa, it's a lot longer than I had it there. You found the roadmap to the Gradle script Kotlin 1.0 as well.
Yes.
Oh boy, sponsored by okay, I'll have to edit that as well. Okay, now
I'm glad you liked it.
Another one that we should talk about, a mention here, is that Ryan Vanderwerf, who does a lot of work with mobile devices, especially with Alexa. He's got all the different Amazon devices, and he has done some presentations at GreatConf regarding ways to integrate Groovy and/or Grails with Alexa. I believe he's doing another one at the G3 Summit this year. At any rate, he has updated his Alexa Skills Gradle plugin, and now it adds audio player support with a community-driven SDK for playing streams like podcasts.
And what podcast comes to mind when you combine Groovy and podcast in the same sentence?
I think he had a problem with trying to get the Groovy podcast to play, and it's possible that may have been my fault, as it turns out, because while he has all the different Amazon devices, I just got a Google Home device, okay?
Yes.
Let me see. Okay, Google, tell me a joke.
Why are libraries so strict? They have to go by the book.
Did you hear that?
Of course.
Yeah,
and that's a very nice copycat from Alexa. I kind of like it. Yeah, that's nice.
Oh, no doubt. But if I ask my Google Home to play a particular podcast, it will. Like if I ask it to play the Bill Simmons podcast, something like that, it'll play the latest. So of course I asked it to play the Groovy podcast, and it was like, I don't know from any Groovy podcast. So I went to Google Music to go search for the Groovy podcast, and it turns out it wasn't available there. And I went, oh geez. So I hit the publish button, and it wanted to know the RSS feed. And when I tried to put in the RSS feed, apparently I had never specified a couple of fields in the RSS feed that it wanted. Like I thought I'd put in I don't know what it was that it was missing, but I added a subtitle, I added an email address, I added whatever, seemed to be missing. And as of this afternoon, it's now under awaiting moderation. I mean, they found it, it's published. Within a short period of time, it will be available, which means that I should be able to play it on my Google Home device. Now, whether that will help Ryan in his effort to play them through Alexa or not, I don't know. He did ask for some kind of signed document so that he could submit and say that it was okay. He had approval to do this sort of thing through Alexa, and I sent him along whatever he asked for. But I don't know what the status is of that. I expect we'll talk to him at the G3 Summit and see what's going on with that. But I do expect, I do hope that the Google people will approve the podcast for Groovy Music or Google Music any time now. I mean, after all, it's been working under iTunes and most other podcast clients for months now.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah, so I hope I didn't make his life any more difficult by not necessarily knowing what I was doing here. But if so, hopefully I have fixed that problem, and then we'll see. Now, anything else you wanted to mention? I suppose Jen Strader published her comments, her update to the Fulbright committee. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it, but I need to look at it, of course.
Well, Jen is of course on a Fulbright scholarship in Copenhagen these days, and she of course has to do things related to Groovy as part of her major thesis project. And one of the things she talked about in that update was all the work she did for the community, helping to put together the Groovy community Slack. Which is very helpful. I mean, of course, it also has the code of conduct in it. It's got mechanisms for filtering and approvals. She did a lot of work on that, and that's very valuable work for the community as a whole.
Yeah.
I know she's also doing a lot of technical things as well, but I think she's got some coursework she's got to get out of the way before she really digs into the compiler issues and the other major researchy things that she plans to do in the Groovy area.
And of course, she's the moderator of the Groovy community Slack that we are glad to remind you, if you didn't enroll already, just go to groovy-community.slackarchive.io and
that's
you
the
can see
archive.
the archives, or go to, I think it's groovycommunity.com, one world, to
Right.
get your own invite and register for the Slack channel.
That's true. That's great. I want to mention that. Now, of course, our friends putting together the various feeds that we use for building our podcast were active as well. For example, the Groovy Calamari had a couple of issues that came out, one talking a lot about transactions. There was another one too. But the scariest thing that happened with Groovy Calamari, I don't know if you noticed this, is now they've got a new logo over there.
Yes,
have you seen it?
I did. Yes.
Yeah, and it's like, well, it's kind of scary, to be honest with you. You know, it's kind of squid-like with a single eye in the middle. It only has 5 legs. I suppose there must be a few more that are hidden. Kind of like the grumpy Gretelfant with only 3 legs. You know, so I'm not exactly sure why they consider this icon to be a good idea, unless you like the idea of a calamari horror movie or whatever,
Yeah.
But okay, good for Sergio. I hope he likes it. And
it's kind of nice. Come on.
It's pink, for crying out loud, too. It's a pink squid with a single eye. I mean,
Yes.
okay, I mean, like we're one to complain about icons, but okay, so be it. But at least I want to make sure we mentioned it. So, everybody go take a look at the new logo for.
Yes. Now I'm afraid that his site is going to collapse right now because all the traffics we send his way.
All 5 people you think will go see at the same time? I don't know if they can handle that. Yeah.
That's my point, right?
And of course, there have been a couple issues of the Grail's Diary as well. Although I don't think they mentioned anything major that we haven't already talked about, although that tends to be much more thorough in that it shows interesting tweets over the week.
I think it goes the other way around. We mention what they have, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, I don't think they are much more thorough. He is much more thorough than we are, But whatever, definitely be sure to check that out. I don't think there are things that we missed on that this time, but there could very well be, and it's of course much more extensive as well.
Right. Just to recap, that's pretty much all. And just to recap the conferences that we're looking for, they didn't change since the last episode, but just for making sure that you know about them and already submitted your talks and ready to go. G3 Summit comes very soon in 2 weeks, right. November 28th in Fort Lauderdale, and that's a great time to be in Florida. Great Conf India, also soon enough, January. Both Greech and Great Conf EU have their cover papers open, so you should submit your Groovy talks there.
Absolutely. We'll be seeing a lot of our groovy friends at the G3 Summit, of course, and we will definitely be sure to hold a podcast from the G3 Summit with as many of the leaders that we can find, that we can get together with. So that I'm really looking forward to that. Of course, I still have. I shouldn't admit that I still have slides to make, right? Still have talks to put together.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine. That's 2 weeks. If it was like day before, I would say maybe you shouldn't say that. But 2 weeks are all fine. And
Well,
I think um, someone on the Slack, guy named Tucker. Do you know him?
yes.
Yeah, so Tucker suggested that he will bring his 360 degrees camera that will be able to record this podcast with all the guests live at G3 Summit.
Yeah, that's pretty freaky. His Twitter handle, as I recall, is Virtual Dogbert.
Yes.
Tucker is the head of the Boston Groovy and Grails user group.
Oh,
So,
here you go.
yeah, I got a chance to see him when I gave a talk up at that user group just before Java 1 a little bit of time ago. So it'll be very nice to see him there. Yeah, so that's great that he's going to bring that, and we'll see how many people we can pack in the room to make that worthwhile as well. Of course, I should mention the G3 Summit is technically part of the No Fluff Just Stuff conference tour. If you go to nofluffjuststuff.com, you see the events for next year. Also, of course, nofluffjuststuff.com/Groovy Podcast is our homepage, if you will.
We are so smooth with all those transitions today. It's just unbelievable.
We are cooking like Betty Crocker here. That's true. Yeah. But the last No Fluff event of the year is this weekend in Denver. So I'm headed on a plane there. And then that will end the No Fluff season for this year. Of course, that still leaves the G3 Summit and then Rich Web Experience the following week, and then another Architecture Conf, ArchConf the week after that. And then we're into January, and we'll talk about next year when we get to that point. But if you ever fall behind on any Groovy podcasts or you want to see the videos or whatever, of course, you can always go to nofluffjuststuff.com/Groovy Podcast, and everything is hosted in embedded players on that site. Of course, if you just want to subscribe, you could see it that way. If you maybe somebody will leave a nice note on iTunes or something. I haven't gotten around to doing that. I really have to say something nice on iTunes. How about, you want to do that too, or should we going to put something nasty?
Yeah, no, we definitely should do something nasty. You know me.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, but it does help people find it, I suppose, and it'll help our advertising rates if and when we ever get any actual real.
Yeah, no, actually, you know what? Our 5 listeners can actually go there, give it high ranking, and write something nice, and then we'll be all set. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, sure, why not? It doesn't cost anything to do that.
Exactly.
Okay. Anything else, or do you think we've pretty much covered it?
I think we nailed it for today, and I'm super excited to see you all at Fort Lauderdale in 2 weeks. That will be awesome.
The triumphant finale of the Groovy Puzzlers. Is that what's going to happen at season 3?
Yes, that will be the positively last show of season 3. And a desperate call for new puzzlers for season 4.
Well, we'll have to make something up. We'll have to see what we can do. We could probably brainstorm. Of course, Paul King's going to be there. He could probably just toss off half a dozen puzzlers without even thinking about it.
I really hope he will. Also, if Jochen will be there, and Paul, by the way, Paul now he's the Groovy lead, so he can probably help me just, releasing a version with enough puzzlers built in for the sake of the show.
Well, we know Guillaume will be there, and probably Cedric as well. So lots of people in the community will be available.
Looking forward. It will be great fun.
Yeah, I assume you will not let that opportunity go by.
Yeah, okay. I'll do my best.
Okay, well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, and our next podcast will be from the G3 Summit, and then we will go from there. So thank you. Good to see you, and see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Okay, take care.